People magazine first brought his emotional journey to our attention. Terrell Brown is here.
Steve Carter always knew he was adopted, but when he got older, he started to wonder who his biological parents were.
In 1977, a casual trip to the store in Hawaii turned into a bewildering mystery when Charlotte and her 6-month-old son, Marks, vanished without a trace. For 34 years, the silence surrounding their disappearance was deafening, leaving their family and the world with more questions than answers. This video delves into the harrowing journey of loss, the relentless pursuit of truth, and the astonishing revelation that unraveled decades later, reminding us that sometimes reality is stranger than fiction. The vanishing, the day Charlotte and her baby disappeared. On a seemingly ordinary day in 1977, the Hawaiian sun cast a warm glow over the islands, promising yet another day in paradise. However, for one small family, this day would mark the beginning of a decades-long enigma. Charlotte, a mother known for her artistic flair, decided to take her 6-month-old son, Marks, on a quick errand to the local store. Little did anyone know, this routine outing would lead to their inexplicable disappearance, leaving behind a void that would echo through the years. Charlotte's partner, Mark Barnes, a dedicated veterinarian, had spent the morning tending to his property. The couple, not formally married but united by their love for each other and their son, seemed to be the embodiment of an idyllic life, with their future as bright as the Hawaiian skies they lived under. But as the hours ticked by, what began as a delay in Charlotte's return turned into concern, and soon, a deep-seated panic began to take root in Mark's heart. The store was mere blocks away from their home, a distance that Charlotte had traversed countless times before. Yet, as the afternoon waned, there was no sign of her or Mark's. When Mark's initial worry gave way to fear, he set out in search of them, only to be met with a sight that sent shivers down his spine. There, near the bus stop, was the baby's stroller, abandoned and eerily empty, with no sign of Charlotte or the child. Mark's instincts urged him to report to the police immediately, but a perplexing decision led him to refrain. Charlotte had a history of impromptu departures, sometimes disappearing for days, only to return without explanation. This habit had sown a seed of doubt in Mark's mind, causing him to wonder if this was yet another of Charlotte's unexpected sojourns. But the presence of the stroller, discarded in public, was uncharacteristic and alarming. As 2 sunsets passed and the night skies cleared twice without their return, the seriousness of the situation could no longer be ignored. Mark's resolve crumbled, and he approached the authorities, reporting the disappearance of his family. It was a move that set the wheels of an investigation in motion, albeit with a delay that would later be scrutinized. The police, after hearing Mark's account, appeared to take the matter seriously. They collected descriptions, promised to look into the matter, and assured him that they would be in touch. Yet, as days turned into weeks, Mark's visits to the police station revealed a disturbing reality. His calls had seemingly vanished into the ether, just like Charlotte and Mark's. There was no record of his reports, no ongoing investigation, no leads being followed. It was as if his desperate pleas for help had been swallowed by the same void that had claimed his family. Mark Barnes, Life Before the Disappearance. The story of Mark Barnes before the disappearance of Charlotte and their baby Marks was one of ambition, love, and a seemingly peaceful family life that gave no indication of the impending tragedy. Mark was a veterinarian, a profession that underscored his nurturing character and dedication to care for those unable to voice their needs. His love for animals was matched by his love for Charlotte, an artist whose creative spirit complemented his practical nature. Together, they were the picture of contentment, living a life that many would envy amidst the beauty of the Hawaiian landscape. Their home was a reflection of their personalities, surrounded by lush flora that Mark tenderly cared for and adorned with Charlotte's art. It was a sanctuary that embodied their shared dreams and aspirations. Mark's days were often filled with the routine of his veterinary practice, while Charlotte's were less predictable, swept along by the whims of her artistic muse. Their relationship, though not legally bound by marriage, was solid. They had forged a partnership based on mutual respect and affection, a union further solidified by the birth of their son, Marks. The baby became the center of their world, the embodiment of their love, and the promise of a lineage to carry on their names and stories. In the community, Mark was known as a dependable and compassionate veterinarian. His clients respected his expertise and his gentle manner with their pets. He had a way of calming the most nervous of animals, a trait that endeared him to all who met him. His work was more than a job. It was a calling, and it granted him a sense of fulfillment that few ever find in their careers. Charlotte, for her part, was enigmatic. Her marriage to Mark followed a previous union that had produced a daughter, who now lived with her father in New York. Despite the physical distance, Charlotte remained a devoted mother, maintaining contact and visiting whenever she could. Her relationship with Mark, though seemingly stable, was punctuated by her sporadic absences, which were a source of bewilderment to those around her. The couple's love story was not without its challenges. They navigated the complexities of a blended family and the demands of their individual passions. Yet, they appeared to the outside world as a unit, a team that was building a life full of potential and hope. Their home was often filled with laughter, the sounds of Mark's baby talk, and the scent of tropical flowers that Mark loved so much. But beneath this idyllic surface, there were undercurrents that hinted at struggles only known to those within the family. Charlotte's bouts of solitude and her need to escape without warning were unsettling, particularly to Mark, who found himself in the role of both a partner and a sometimes single parent when she was away. Despite this, he never wavered in his support for her, always hoping that her return would bring a renewed sense of stability. The investigation begins, a delayed response. When Charlotte and her infant son Mark disappeared, it wasn't just their physical presence that was lost. It was as if the very essence of their being had been erased, leaving behind a haunting silence. The investigation into their vanishing began not with the urgency one might expect, but with a series of delays that would later haunt all those involved. Mark's initial hesitation to contact the authorities stemmed from Charlotte's history of impromptu departures, a pattern that had woven itself into the fabric of their relationship. It was this very pattern that delayed the alarm, a decision that would weigh heavily on Mark in the years to come. However, once the seriousness of the situation took hold, Mark's instincts propelled him to action, and he finally reached out to the local police, reporting the disappearance of his partner and child. The response from law enforcement was lackluster at best. There was no immediate mobilization, no sense of the critical nature of the first 48 hours in a missing persons case. Days turned into weeks, and Mark's solitary efforts to find Charlotte and Mark's continued, with the echo of his own footsteps as his only companion in a search that seemed increasingly futile. When Mark returned to the police station expecting updates and progress, he was met with confusion. There was no record of his previous calls, no documentation of the disappearance, no investigation underway. The absence of an official record was baffling. Had his calls been lost in a bureaucratic black hole, or had they never been made? The answers were as elusive as the whereabouts of his family. The inaction of the police was as mysterious as it was frustrating. According to protocol, the disappearance of a child was meant to trigger an immediate response. Yet there was none. The police's failure to act promptly suggested a possibility of negligence or even complicity in ignoring the case, an implication that would cast a shadow of doubt and suspicion on the department for years to come. As the investigation officially began, weeks after the disappearance, the trail had already gone cold. Leads that might have been fresh were now stale, and potential witnesses. Memories had begun to fade. The police canvassed the neighborhood, spoke to friends and family, and combed through the couple's lives in search of any clue that might explain their sudden absence. But every avenue they pursued led to a dead end. Mark's behavior came under scrutiny. His delay in reporting the disappearance, his decision not to involve the police immediately, and his subsequent claims of having done so were all questioned. The narrative that began to form around him was one of suspicion and doubt, further complicating the investigation. The absence of evidence to support his claims only added to the growing ambiguity surrounding the case. Mark's search. The quest without a trace. The disappearance of Charlotte and Marks plunged Mark into a relentless quest, one that would consume his days and haunt his nights. With the official investigation yielding no tangible leads, Mark embarked on a search that was as tireless as it was heartbreaking. Every morning he woke with the resolve to find some trace of his family, and every evening he returned home with the heavy burden of disappointment. Mark's search was exhaustive. He scoured the streets of Hawaii, canvassing the neighborhoods where they lived, the places Charlotte loved to visit, and the quiet corners she may have sought out during her previous times of solitude. He spoke to shopkeepers, bus drivers, and pedestrians, anyone who might have seen something, however insignificant it might have seemed. Yet, despite his efforts, he was met with sympathetic shrugs and shaking heads. No one had seen Charlotte or Marks. It was as if they had vanished into thin air. Not content to confine his search to familiar territories, Mark extended his efforts beyond the local area. He took to the airwaves, appearing on television and radio, making impassioned pleas for any information regarding their whereabouts. He printed flyers with their pictures, distributing them far and wide, hoping that someone's memory would be jogged, that a face would be recognized, that his family would be returned to him. The emotional toll of the search was immeasurable. The strain of not knowing the fate of his loved ones was a constant companion, an ache that refused to be soothed. Yet it was the hope, the slim chance of a happy reunion, that propelled him forward. It was a hope that refused to be extinguished, even in the darkest moments of despair. Mark's life became a duality of existence: the dedicated veterinarian who continued to serve his community with compassion, and the desperate father who could not, would not, give up on his child. His clients, many of whom had become friends, offered support and assistance, joining in the search, spreading the word, and keeping the story alive. But as the weeks turned into months, and the months into years, the initial surge of community involvement waned. Life moved on for everyone but Mark. The case goes cold, years without answers. As the bright Hawaiian sun continued its daily passage across the sky, the case of Charlotte and Marks Barnes entered into the somber twilight of the unsolved. Years passed, and the fervor of the search waned under the weight of time and unanswered questions. Mark Barnes, once driven by a restless urgency, found his actions becoming rituals of remembrance more than active searching. The case, much like the missing themselves, slipped into the shadows of the unresolved and the forgotten. The police files on Charlotte and Marks grew dusty, relegated to the dark corners of the department where cold cases languished. Investigators who had once pursued leads with vigor were reassigned to new cases, fresh urgencies that demanded their attention. The zeal that had once defined the investigation was replaced by a resignation to the passage of time and the diminishing likelihood of a resolution. The community, which had initially rallied around the tragedy, slowly returned to its usual rhythms. Conversations about the disappearance became less frequent. The posters that had once adorned storefronts and lamp posts faded and were eventually removed. The story of the vanished mother and son became a local legend, a tale to be told rather than a mystery to be solved. Mark, ever the dedicated father, never fully abandoned hope. He kept the bedrooms of Charlotte and Marks just as they were, time capsules awaiting their return. Anniversaries of the disappearance were marked by vigils and renewed calls for information, but these, too, became part of the routine, echoes of a tragedy that had no end. As Mark rebuilt his life in California, the absence of Charlotte and Marks was a void that could not be filled. He remarried, had children, and found happiness in new beginnings. Yet beneath the surface of this newfound life, the unanswered questions about his first family gnawed at him. He would catch himself scanning crowds for Charlotte's face, or imagining what Marks would look like as a boy, a teenager, a man. The lack of closure was a wound that never fully healed. It affected his relationships, his sense of security, and his view of the world. While he cherished his new family, there was always a part of him that was elsewhere, searching, wondering, grieving. As technology advanced and the internet became a repository of the world's knowledge, Mark took to online forums, missing person databases, and social media in the hope that digital footprints might lead to the answers that the physical world had not yielded. He uploaded photos, shared stories, and engaged with a community of others who knew the unique pain of not knowing. A daughter's plea, reopening the case. Decades had passed since Charlotte and Marks vanished, and the case had been consigned to the annals of unsolved mysteries. It was a cold case in the truest sense, its embers long since cooled. Yet, an unexpected development breathed new life into the investigation. This impetus came not from the weary hands of law enforcement or the dogged persistence of Mark, but from a source intimately connected to the heart of the mystery, Charlotte's firstborn, her daughter Jennifer. Jennifer, who had lived a life shadowed by the disappearance of her mother and half-brother, had grown into a determined woman. Her memories of her mother were fragmented, a mosaic of the few years they had shared and the stories told by others. As she matured, the absence of closure became a driving force, compelling her to seek answers. She could not bear the thought of the case dissolving into obscurity, a footnote in the annals of her family's history. In 2001, galvanized by the same tenacity that had defined her mother's art and her own upbringing, Jennifer approached the authorities with a simple yet powerful request: reopen the case of Charlotte and Marks Barnes. Her plea was bolstered by the advancements in forensic science and DNA technology that had revolutionized the field of criminal investigation. The request from a daughter yearning to know the fate of her mother and brother rekindled interest in the case. The police, facing the public pressure that Jennifer's campaign had generated and the potential of new forensic avenues, agreed to re-examine the old files, to dust off the volumes that chronicled one of the most baffling disappearances in their jurisdiction. The reopening of the case was a clarion call to all involved. The original investigators, many of whom were nearing retirement or had already laid down their badges, were consulted. Fresh eyes pored over the evidence, looking for the thread that had been missed, the clue that had been overlooked in the initial flawed investigation. As the police delved back into the case, so too did the media. Local newspapers ran stories revisiting the disappearance. Television stations broadcasted retrospectives, and online outlets published articles that reached audiences far beyond the Hawaiian shores. The renewed interest generated tips and leads, though many were well-trodden or based on hearsay and memories faded by time. One of the most significant steps taken by the police was to enter the details of the case into national and international databases for missing persons. They updated the profiles with age-progressed images of Charlotte and Marks, hoping that someone, somewhere, would recognize the faces that time had altered. The twist of DNA, a startling revelation. The rebirth of the case brought with it the promise of modern technology, and at the heart of this resurgence was DNA, the blueprint of life that holds the stories of our lineage. It was this remarkable tool that would crack open the door to the past and provide a startling revelation in the case of Charlotte and Marks Barnes. After years of fruitless searching and dead-end inquiries, the case had settled into a quiet dormancy. However, as Jennifer's plea stirred the embers of investigation, a critical decision was made to utilize DNA testing, a scientific advancement that had not been available at the time of the original investigation. Jennifer provided her own DNA to aid in the search, a genetic beacon that could illuminate the darkness that had shrouded her mother and brother's fate. The authorities began the meticulous process of cross-referencing Jennifer's DNA with various databases, hoping against hope to find a match with individuals who had been adopted, found as unclaimed children, or listed as missing persons. The task was gargantuan, sifting through a myriad of genetic data in search of the proverbial needle in a haystack. Months passed with no significant breakthrough, and the specter of another dead end loomed over the case. Then, in a twist that seemed to come from the pages of a detective novel, a match was found. The DNA provided by Jennifer showed a close genetic link to an individual who had been adopted many years ago, a man named Steve Carter. Steve had led a life filled with its own questions and uncertainties. Adopted at a young age, he had always wondered about his origins. His adoptive family had provided him with a loving home, but the mystery of his biological roots had always lingered in the back of his mind. As an adult, Steve had embarked on a journey to discover his past, submitting his DNA to a database for missing children, not knowing that it would be the key to unlocking a decades-old mystery. The match between Jennifer and Steve was a seismic event in the investigation. It suggested that Steve could very well be the missing Marks Barnes, the baby who had disappeared with Charlotte all those years ago. The revelation sent shockwaves through all involved. Could it be that Marks had been living a life disconnected from his true identity, unaware of the tragedy of his early childhood? The police, armed with this new information, approached Steve, who was equally stunned by the possibility. The prospect of being a missing person, of having a family he never knew, was overwhelming. To confirm the match, further DNA testing was necessary, and Steve submitted to the tests with a mix of apprehension and hope. Unraveling the mystery. The truth behind the disappearance. The revelation of Steve Carter's true identity as Marks Barnes was a watershed moment that led to a cascade of subsequent discoveries. With this new thread to follow, the authorities unraveled the tangled web of events that had led to the disappearance of Charlotte and her infant son. It transpired that after their disappearance, Charlotte had experienced a severe mental health crisis. This explained her unexpected and unexplained absences in the past and was likely exacerbated by the stress of her life circumstances. The investigation revealed that Charlotte, under the guise of a different identity, had been found wandering the streets in a disoriented state with marks in her arms, shortly after they were reported missing. A woman who encountered Charlotte in this distressed state had reported the incident to the police, leading to Charlotte being admitted to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Marks, too young to communicate and without any form of identification, was placed into the care of the state. In the chaos of this crisis and with no one to claim him, Marks's connection to his missing persons case was lost. Charlotte, unfortunately, escaped the facility, and her whereabouts remained unknown. Meanwhile, Marks, identified as an abandoned child, was put up for adoption. The system that was supposed to protect him instead obscured his past and gave him a new identity. As Steve Carter, he grew up oblivious to the dramatic events of his infancy. This shocking sequence of events raised questions about the efficacy and coordination of law enforcement and social services at the time. It became painfully clear that opportunities to connect Marks's discovery as a child with the missing persons case of Charlotte and Marks were missed. Multiple agencies failed to communicate effectively, and the lack of technology and sophisticated databases at the time meant that critical information was not shared or followed up on. As the pieces of the puzzle slowly came together, the fate of Charlotte remained the last missing piece. The investigation took on a renewed intensity, with detectives now retracing Charlotte's last known movements and digging into records from the time of her admission to the psychiatric facility. Aftermath and reflection. Understanding the impact. The resolution of the case of Charlotte and Marks Barnes brought with it a complex aftermath. The discovery of the truth was a moment of profound reflection for all those involved, a time to grapple with the impact of the years of uncertainty and the consequences of the revelation. Mark, having endured the torment of not knowing for so long, found himself in the midst of a conflicting storm of relief and sorrow. The joy of finding his son was tempered by the grief for Charlotte and the years of life they had lost. The resolution did not bring back the time missed with Marks, now Steve, nor did it restore the life that Charlotte should have lived. The knowledge of what had happened provided closure, but also opened a space for mourning what could have been, a life together as a family. For Steve, the revelation of his true identity was life-altering. The narrative of his life, which he had accepted as complete, had been upended. There was a profound sense of dislocation, a need to reconcile the life he had lived with the history he had just discovered. The knowledge that he had a father who had never stopped searching for him, a sister who had fought to reopen the case, brought a sense of belonging he hadn't realized he was missing. Yet, it also brought a sense of loss for the mother he would never know and the years he could never reclaim. The case also had a lasting impact on the community and the institutions that had failed to prevent the tragedy. It prompted a reevaluation of protocols regarding missing persons and the care of individuals with mental health crises. law enforcement agencies and social services faced scrutiny, leading to reforms designed to improve communication and prevent similar cases from going unresolved.